Pleased to see such a large crowd here this evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jody Malloy. I'm president of the Rouses Champlain Historical Association. And of course tonight our subject is Fort Montgomery. Anyone who has ever crossed the bridge leading from New York to Vermont has been fascinated by the great stone structure just to the north. What is it? Is it open to the public? What battles were fought there? Well, let's talk about it. My mother had several admonitions for little girls in the 50s. The top three were, stay away from the tracks. Don't swim there, there's broken glass. And don't go down to the fort. Yes, Mom? Naturally, we packed our picnics and off we went straight down there. And it was a fantasy world. It was spring and beautiful, and the stone arches were tremendous, and we played, and we were pirates, and we were pioneer people, and we were fairy princesses, everything that our little imagines could be. And in those days, we didn't notice the danger and the crumbling and the graffiti that was starting to be there. Much later, I went back after college with a friend, and I was extremely saddened to see the deterioration, the garbage, the horrible graffiti that was along the walls, and the things that had been done. And I was so sad that I had never gone back. I'm pleased to see that now there is interest, and that someone like Jim has come along to write about the fort. Let me tell you just a little bit about him. When I returned to Rouses Point in the early 90s, I became interested in the history of Lake Champlain, the battles, and most of all, the wooden boats. I was introduced to Jim Millard, a man who was chronicling various aspects of the Champlain Valley. Millard has been publishing America's Historic Lakes since 1997. He feels that Lake Champlain has played a significant role in his rich and full life, and he feels that his research is one small way to give back to the area. A member of the Vermont Historical Society, the Clinton County Historical Society, Mount Independence Coalition, and the American Association of State and Local History, Jim is also webmaster for the Valcour Bay Research Project. He is employed at St. Michael's College as a senior instructional support specialist with the Information Technology Department. Jim lives with his wife Lynn on the western shore of Lake Champlain, directly opposite Plattsburgh Bay and Crab Island. In addition to the America's Historic Lakes Project, Jim is the author of The Secrets of Crab Island and Following Fort Blunder, the story of Fort Montgomery, Rouses Point, New York. Jim has had articles published in Lifelines, the Journal of the New York American Canadian Genealogical Society, the Burning Issues, newsletter of the Valley Military Association, and the Red Hackle, the regimental magazine of the 42nd Highland Regiment, the Black Watch. He has also provided materials for use in public television documentaries and educational textbooks. We especially want to thank Ann Thurber of Power Text Incorporated and the Pod family for generously underwriting our program this evening. We hope that you will join the Rouses Point Champlain Historical Society in celebrating our community and its heritage in this series of programs. Please welcome Mr. Jim Millard.
Thank you very much, Jody, for that wonderful introduction. My goodness, what a crowd we've got here this evening. I certainly think that says a lot about the popularity of this wonderful little place. Fort Montgomery certainly does, I believe, hold a real special place in the psyche of this community specifically. I hear from people all over the world about this place. America's Historic Lakes, I don't know if many of you have probably been to the website, but it covers a big distance. It covers all of Lake George, Lake Champlain. Probably the most talked about, most popular topic is this old fort. So we're going to get into it in detail this evening, hoping that if you like what you see, we're going to see a lot of old photos, we'll see a lot of new photos. We're going to talk about why it matters, and I'm hoping that maybe by the end of this evening, you might have a different perspective on it, even those of you who have known this place maybe since you were kids. So, rediscovering Fort Plunder and Fort Montgomery. Before I get into it, first of all, I did want to take and acknowledge a few folks. I want to thank, first of all, Rouses Champlain Historical Society and Jody. These are the sponsors that are here this evening. If they didn't sponsor it, I wouldn't be here. So thank you all very much for Jody and the society. Ann Thurber, Stephen, and Victor Todd. As you may know, these are the owners, the representatives of Fort Montgomery Estates, and Ann is the general manager of PowerTech. She has been the person who I have been working with in, well, when I get out to the fort. If it wasn't for Ann, I would not be able to get out there and do my research. So these folks have been great. They've been very, very receptive to my research, and like I said, I owe them a debt of gratitude. They've also been real good about sharing the marvelous material from the late Victor pod, and you'll see a lot of that wonderful material this evening as we get into the presentation. Roger and Doug Harwood. These are two gentlemen who, well, if you've seen the wonderful aerial photographs on America's Historic Lakes, like you saw one at the introduction. These gentlemen I've known for a few years now. They have been very, very generous with their wonderful photography. Every once in a while I'll get this marvelous package in the mail, usually in the email, and there's just the delightful gems which these folks share with me. There's some wonderful pictures of Fort Montgomery which these fellows have shared. Roger is my sidekick, if you will. He's a retired industrial arts teacher. Roger sees things that I do not see. My background is high-tech. I'm a computer person. And Roger has just been wonderful. He's usually at my side out there at the fort, so I'm very, very grateful for all he's done to help me out. Charles Barney is a, you're going to see some of Charles Barney's material this evening. A little bit of a surprise later on. He's an individual who lives out in the western part of New York State now. He's a Rouses Point relative, not a relative, a Rouses Point native. And I'll just let you see later on what Charles has contributed. Arthur Tremblay is another person I've just recently got to know, by email basically. He's a Rouses Point native. He's an illustrator, and he's basically asked me if I'd like to have him do some illustrations for the upcoming book. And you're going to see some nice work that Mr. Tremblay has done this evening. John Weaver is probably the leading authority on third system fortifications. I owe Mr. Weaver a huge debt. He's a fellow from Illinois. I invited him to give this evening. He could not make it. But if any of you want to know about these forts, this is the book you want to have. It's called A Legacy in Brick and Stone. And I mention it because Mr. Weaver has been very generous with his material. A lot of what you see this evening, the illustrations, and a lot of the research material came from John Crook. So if you want to know about Fort Montgomery, you want to get that book. John Kruger and the Clinton County Historical Association and Natty Shields, these are folks who have been very generous with materials from their archives. You'll see some wonderful illustrations this evening, so without them, none of this stuff would have happened. These wonderful photos you're going to be seeing. And some of you folks may actually know who John Ross was. I never had the opportunity to meet Mr. Ross, but he was probably the only other person other than the Reverend Daniel Taylor, who was a very late person. He basically wrote in 1894. These two individuals wrote extensively about the fort. I draw a lot from their materials, and I have to say it's a debt of gratitude that I owe to them. So I did want to mention all of those folks, because this presentation would not happen if it weren't for them. Everybody hear me okay? Great. This may be a surprise to you. Some of you know this, some of you do not. We're talking primarily about Fort Montgomery this evening. We are going to talk about Fort Plunder, certainly. We're going to talk about a little bit about the 45th parallel controversy. But the main thing I want to point out is that this fort, if you're looking to hear about this fort being a terrible mistake, a horrible blunder, you're going to be in for a surprise, because I'm not going to tell you that. I don't believe that Fort Montgomery was a blunder. We're going to talk about Fort Plunder early on, and then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this place. Because this really was a truly remarkable example of mid-19th century military technology. It was really an important element in the young nation's defensive strategy. And I do believe that it helped to prevent war, that it was a deterrent to war. So we're going to be talking about its role, but I do not believe that Fort Montgomery was a blunder. We're going to talk about this fellow, General Joseph Totten. He was an amazing man because he learned from his mistakes and actually rose to become a very, very prominent and well-respected general. A lot of people don't realize that, don't know that General Totten actually designed the defenses at Plattsburgh in 1814, Fort Monroe, Fort Brown, and Fort Scott. He worked closely with General McComb and was very, very instrumental in setting up that marvelous set of earthwork defenses on the south bank of the Saranac. He did build Fort Blunder in 1816. Not only was it built north of the 45th parallel, but it was a pathetic fort. It was built largely on debris built from, that was moved from the defenses from Plattsburgh. It was not built on a very good foundation. It's a good thing that the fort basically was ceded to Canada later on because it really started to fall apart shortly after they put it together. But General Totten learned fast. He went on to found the Coastal Fortifications Board. He became the chief of the Army Corps of Engineers. He was the founder of the 3rd System of Fortifications, which was a truly remarkable defense system that was designed to basically protect the eastern seaboard. So there were some flashes and forts on the western seaboard, and obviously there were some here on the northern frontier. But he was the driving force behind Fort Montgomery. He was a remarkable man, and I did not want to get into the presentation without mentioning General Totten. It's really important, and I know that a lot of you realize this, but there are so many misconceptions about Fort Montgomery that I did want to stress that there were not one fort, but 2 forts on Island Point. The first fort, Fort Blunder, was built in 1816. This is the fort that was indeed built north of the 45th parallel. This is the fort that was ceded to Canada, and this is the fort that looked like that. It was not a very impressive structure. It was an octagonal shape. I have to believe that dock on the eastern side of it was a little bit out of proportion, but it did not take up the entire size of the island, but it was a much, much smaller fort than this one, which was truly a much more significant structure. Fort Montgomery was built in 1844 after the Webster-Ashburton Treaty returned that island point back to the United States. What they did is they actually moved the border north. There had been some very, very difficult negotiations. There had been some real nasty stuff going on, particularly about territory in Maine. And the Webster-Ashburton Treaty basically settled all of that. And the property once again became part of the United States. It's important, it's a good thing that they did because the country had decided even before that they needed to fortify this property. They were actually considering putting up a fortress at Windmill Point, and surveys were done at the time, but that did not happen. So I want to make sure we understand that Fort Montgomery is not Fort Blunder. This fort, the one we have out there now, the ruins that are out there, was not built on Canadian soil. And I do that because what we're seeing here is some of the misinformation. If you thought that was Fort Blunder, you're not alone. This is a publication the Delaware and Hudson Railroad put out, basically talking, they discussed the taking down of the fort, but they stated right there, Fort Montgomery built by the United States on Canadian soil. That's not right. That's not what happened. Here's another illustration. This is from the Syracuse Post-Standard of Sunday, March 7th. And this is courtesy of Mr. Barney. And it says, the old order changes, the stones of Fort Blunder are used to construct a new bridge. Well, if you like the photo, you hold on to your hat because that's really nothing. That's just an old newspaper photo. But it's not accurate. That's not Fort Blunder that was taken down. Why build a fort here? A better question would be, why didn't it happen sooner? It really is a remarkable thing to think about. As you can see from this wonderful photo, courtesy of the Harwoods, Fort Montgomery was built at a truly crucial location. It's the place where Lake Champlain enters the river, becomes the River Richelieu. I've shown basically some very, very important places in early history, in Nationville history. Illinois certainly was the place that, if you think about the French and Indian War, there were conflicts there. That was the site of the big British base, the big British naval base, where the Confiance, the Confiance, sailed down to the Battle of Plattsburgh. It was a crucial location. It was the entrance to the lake was a historical invasion route. It had gone way back. Native Americans used it going back and forth to war with each other. Early French and Indian raids south, Mohawk raids north on New France. The French and Indian War, Dieskau, Montcalm, Amherst, all came down. The American Revolution, we had the American invasion of Canada. We had the British incursion south. We had Carleton, Battle of Valcourt, Burgoyne coming down in the major expedition. The War of 1812, we had Murray's Raid, Rigaud Downey, the Battle of Plattsburgh. It's rather remarkable that this did not get fortified sooner, because it was a crucial intersection on this remarkable waterway through the wilderness. The first fort, Fort Blunder, looked like this. And this is a rather remarkable document because there's not a lot that is surfaced showing us what Fort Blunder looked like. It was much smaller than the current fort. You'll pick up just a tiny bit of the island. If you notice where it was, you can see that there was a guardhouse here. There was a remarkable series of buildings out here. But this I thought was a fascinating structure. Is that focused? Is that okay for everybody? I hope it's not too blurred. I'm guessing that this must have been a removable bridge. It's the only thing I can think of that they would actually take and put back and forth to access the island. I don't know that for a fact, but that's what I'm guessing it would have been. You can see we had a down over here. This is where the bridge is. Rouses Point Village, of course. And of course, we have a profile, a section, and a rear elevation of what that first fort looked like.
This is
A rather remarkable document. This is a
profile
elevation of a castle of Island Point, at Rouses Point. Okay. This is the other document was a British document. This is actually from the Army Corps of Engineers. I apologize for the quality of it, but this is something that I basically got from the good graces of the folks at Tower Text. This came from National Archives. I'm hoping to have my own copy here soon, but it's a fascinating thing to see, and it does really give us some information about the fort, what that first fort looked like. This is a rather interesting article, photograph, illustration. As far as I'm concerned, this is a first. Mr. Trombley took what material I had, and I did think he did a rather remarkable job showing us what that first fort would look like. This is a first look. It's a work in progress. I just got to see this afternoon, talking the PowerPoint presentation. But I think once we refine this, we're going to have a pretty good idea of what Fort Blunder looked like. So this is hopefully a series of illustrations we're going to have in the upcoming book. But I think that's a pretty good representation. And basically, we believe it had 64 guns. It was octagonal, 8 sides, and the fort was not there very long. What we're going to talk about also, as we get into it, is this place. I think this is the place that matters most to all of you. This is a place where a lot of you have been. This is a place I think is dear to you. This is probably the reason why most of you are here this evening, Fort Montgomery. Fort Montgomery is a wonderful example of what was called a third system fortification. Fort Montgomery was truly remarkable structure. It was very typical of what we would see all along the seacoast. It was about medium size compared to some of them. Some were much, much larger. There were some that were much smaller. But the actual design structure is pretty similar. What you had is 5 bastions, 5 what are called curtains, these are the straight sections. You had 4 powder magazines, 1 in each of the large bastions. Each bastion did not have one. You had primarily a barrack section here. It was surrounded by water. It took up the entire island plus, and there was a wet ditch or a moat. On the western face was a very significant earthen embankment called the cover face. That was a key piece in the defensive strategy of Fort Montgomery. The cover face was important because in the unlikely event of an attack on the fort from the land, and keep in mind that everybody had come down the water, come down Lake Champlain to Richelieu. The thinking at the time was that they were to set up siege guns. What would happen is the siege guns would be able to take, they would not be on the water, they'd be able to batter holes in that wall of the western face much easier. So the cover face was a very significant step in protecting that western wall. It was raised, but what happened with the cover face is basically the thinking was that the cannonballs would actually have to take and get over that. It also would be an obstacle to infantry attack. What would happen is they'd have to take and go up, scale the cover face, come down the cover face, and go into deep into the wet ditch. And we'll get into that a little bit further on as we go. But basically, this is a typical fort design for a third system fort. Fort Montgomery was designed to hold a garrison, a wartime garrison, of 800 people. It was designed to mount 125 guns on 3 tiers, and we're going to show as we get into it how that tier structure worked. This is a rather remarkable illustration. It's a little fanciful, but there are some elements of truth to it. It does show the dock or wharf where the actual stones from Isle of Mont and Kings Bay were brought in. You can see the derricks there. The bastion structure isn't right, but it does tell us a little bit about what it looked like when they were building the fort. I believe that most of the stone did come in by barge, and it was offloaded here on that wharf there. It was begun in 1844 after the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. It was constructed over a 30-year period. Basically around by 1876, the fort was completed. Like a lot of major weapons systems or military appropriations, the third system fortifications were debated throughout the entire course of their active life. Many of these third system fortifications never were finished. Fort Montgomery, at least, was essentially completed. It took a long time. It did not spare any expense, but they debated the worthiness of this fort, whether they should keep putting money into it. But a lot of third system forts never got finished. They basically just ended up with just a very few. There may be a curtain or bastion, but of dozens of forts, not all of them, actually probably a little more than half were actually completed. The chief engineer was Joseph Totten, the same fellow who built the first fort. He learned his lesson. This fort was built on a hemlock timber village that was actually built upon piles. They obviously didn't put the piles in the first time. This was the first instance of using a pile driver up in the North Country. The piles are driven 12 to 55 feet deep, and this hemlock timber village was actually quite a thing. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, but it made a difference. It's really the reason that fort is still largely standing today. The stone was this black marble or limestone. We see it all over the North Country, particularly in northern Lake Champlain Islands. It was from Isle of Mont and also from Kings Bay. And the total size of this fort was about 3 acres, including this enormous cover face. Saturday when I was out at the fort, I did a little TV interview out there Saturday with Roger, and no sooner did we get on the shore, and Roger noticed everything. He said, "Jim, look down." And sure enough, you can see some of the original timber logs still sticking out from underneath this fort, part of that original timber village. I thought that was a remarkable thing. The reason we can see that, unfortunately, are these little critters. the zebra mussels. Believe it or not, they do have a good side. They do clarify the water to a large extent. But it was remarkable to see that. Roger pointed out, yes, you can actually see the sort of hemlock timbers back there from the 1844 construction. The limestone came from Isle of Mont, Kings Bay Quarries. It's rich in fossils. We all know that. We've heard about the remarkable quarries up in Isle of Mont, but you can still see the fossils to the walls. I thought this was a remarkable document. This is from the archives of the Clinton County Historical Association. It's a daily report of services rendered at Fort Montgomery. On this day, I believe it's 1865, there were 47 and a half workers out there. I'm not sure about the half a worker. That half a worker we know was a laborer, but actually no, but 47 and a half laborers with a total of 76 and a half workers out there. So I thought this was a rather remarkable document. We know that at any given time, there were hundreds of people. This was a huge undertaking. Supposedly, the Reverend Taylor tells us back in his 1894 writing that at least 400 people were working on the fort at one time. I wish I had more time to talk about Reverend Taylor because he was quite a character. He loved Rouses Point. He was very proud of Fort Montgomery. But he tells us some things we didn't know. He tells us that the people died in the construction. It's interesting. You also see a little bit of his prejudices here maybe too. He was quite taken that Mr. Hammond had died, but he also mentions that a Frenchman and Irishman died too. So, but he wrote a wonderful thing called The Shores of Champlain. And if you get an opportunity to read it, I recommend you do that. But thank you, Anne, for putting the Reverend Taylor's work. This is and it's not very good, you can't see it very well. This is actually the southern side of the western curtain. And I wanted you to see a little bit about, see what that fort actually looked like inside of the plans. This, I believe, is from 18, this is from just about the time of the Civil War. You see the wet ditch. You can see basically the different rooms. Far over on this side over there would be the southwestern bastion. You had clothing storage, sergeant's rooms, storerooms. This was the main passageway between. As we get into later on, you can show you some of the ruins. You see some of these things. But you notice the loopholes. This fort was pierced for musketry. And all of those rooms actually had what's called rifle loopholes, or musket loopholes, for the defenders to be able to take and fight off an attack from that western face. This was the primary barracks section of Fort Montgomery. There were barracks also in the lower tier of all of the other curtains, but this was primarily, there were not casemates for cannons in this section. So the postern entrance was in right here. I'm hoping, John Weaver's actually supposed to be getting me some more of these documents from the National Archives. I'm hoping I get the rest of it. We'll see. Maybe if I find the rest, you can put me back and I can share those with you. Fort Montgomery had some truly remarkable, interesting archaeological features, and I want to share just some of them with you this evening. Some of those were the spiral staircases, the powder magazines, the casemates with cotton casemates and embrasures. They were truly remarkable structures. They were state-of-the-art military technology at the time. We're going to show you some pictures of the covered face. We're going to look at the wet ditch, the moat, and some of the fort access points. The spiral staircases, they were not unique to Fort Montgomery, but every time I see these, I find these things just amazing. These allowed access from the parade ground to the second tier, which was the casemate tier, that's where the big guns were, up to the barbette tier, which was also at Alpha 53 guns. These were, as you can see, rather remarkable structures. They were self-supporting, and there were four of these. Four of these, one in each of the large bastions. The spiral staircases were topped with square, wooden roofed structures with 8 windows. This photo came from a glass slide. You can see the stains on it, what have you. This is from the Archives collection. But it's a remarkable photo because it's the only one I've seen that shows so clearly these wooden structures that were atop each of the bastions where those staircases were. These structures disappeared very, very early in the history of the fort. Many, many photos later on show that those are long gone. In many photos, you only see the very tops of them. So this is a wonderful photo. This is towards the west wall. This is the barrack section. This is the south curtain. This is the section that you still see from the Rouses Bridge, obviously to the other side. But I thought that was a wonderful photo of those structures atop the staircases. Spiral staircases today. Get used to the graffiti. It was a challenge for me photographing the fort to try to make this something that was suitable for everybody to see. The graffiti is shocking. It's very saddening, but it's everywhere. So just prepare yourself for it. You can see where the stair steps were put in there. This is one of the staircases. This one actually shows, I was surprised to see some of them are still standing. On my last visit to the fort, the vegetation was much more lush. I went out there only in the summertime. And it was a real treat to get out there in the spring because I discovered a lot more that I had not seen. And so I was able to actually get in close enough to see that some of the steps were still there. So these are some of the spiral staircases. Then and now, again, you can see what they used to look like. They were capped with the wooden structures for ventilation and light. You can imagine how dark it would have been in there without that. And here we actually have some of those steps in a pile at the very bottom of one of the staircases. The powder magazines were wonderful. Powder magazines, as you can imagine, were a real source of concern to designers of these forts. They did not want to have their own people blowing up the forts. There were 4 main powder magazines there. One was located in every one but the small east bastion. There were also 2 service magazines that were located in the very top of the barbette tier on the western face of the wall. I didn't think they had ever been finished until I got up there Saturday and looked at them and they were. So the service magazines were finished evidently. Each of these was fully lined. Walls, floors, ceiling, and wood, doors with wood. Wooden pegs were used instead of nails. The wooden wall was offset a little by under a foot from the main stone wall, and that space was vented through the chimneys up to the earthen terraplane atop the rampart. There was a system in place to exhaust the fumes from inside the magazine into this airspace. Every precaution was taken to prevent explosions. Soldiers who entered the magazines were under strict orders to either remove their shoes or put on socks. They couldn't bring any sort of metal into the magazine for sparks. Think about the challenge it must have been for lighting to go into these powder magazines. Obviously, no flame was allowed in there. In 1850, a document that basically talks about instructions for manning these forts said that the sentinel or guard at the magazine when it's open should have no firearms. Everyone who enters the magazine should take off his shoes or put socks over them. No sword or cane or anything which might occasion sparks should be carried in. This is a view of ceiling of one of the magazines. This is the Northwest magazine. These structures are pitch black. We had to use the very, very bright flash for this. They're also very, very dangerous because they are huge. They actually extended from across up 2 stories from the bottom tier up to the casemate level. And they're enormous structures. All 4 of them are still there. There's another view of the powder magazines. Keep in mind that there would have been a floor there, a second tier, but these would have been coated with the remarkable fine wood structure that we saw earlier on. It's amazing to see them today. There's not a trace of anything of that sort. This is an early view across the parade ground towards the casemates. And this is actually looking towards the smaller east bastion, the bastion pointed due east. It's a good view of the casemates from within the fort. In this lower level here, the one that actually had the rooms, each of these on the what's called on the outside side, on the scarp side, were actually pierced for musketry. This is the second level up here. Each of these were called casemates. It would have been either a 10-inch Rodman or a 32-pounder Columbia or Seacoast gun. Each one of these, which is called a bay there, is actually called a casemate. The very top layer, the barbette layer, surprisingly enough, was where most of the guns were going to go. There were going to be 53 guns put on top of this the top level of the fort. You can see where the wooden structure atop the staircase has been removed. They did disappear very early. There aren't a lot of photographs around that show the wood and the doors. Most of the photos I've seen, and you can see this evening, the wooden doors on the casemates are gone. There certainly is not a lot of glass in any of these. This is another wonderful photo, I thought. This shows a different view. This is a little bit more towards the north. What I've done is I've annotated to show some of the features. You can see the barbette tier, you can see the casemate tier, and you can see the northeast bastion there, the east bastion, and of course, this is the entire, the section between the bastions was called the curtain. Each of these was a casemate. This photo tells us all sorts of interesting things. First of all, it clearly shows how the fort incorporated changing technology as it was built over the years. And it was built over 30 years. You notice the gun emplacements are actually called embrasures, shown on the southeast bastion. These were called 24-pounder flank howitzers. These were an anti-personnel weapon. And yes, these did have guns in them. We're going to talk a little bit later on about that. But these emplacements, these embrasures, at one time sported cannon. You notice the bottom tier, how we have brick. Notice the top, you don't see the brick. Well, the top casemates incorporated, the embrasures incorporated something that was named after General Totten. It was a Totten embrasure. And it really shows that as this fort was built over the years, they incorporated newer technology. The lower level, on all the entire fort, is made up of, on all the bastions anyway, has the old style brick embrasures. The Totten embrasures on the top were built later on. This is another wonderful illustration, I thought, showing why the gun crews would have felt much more comfortable being behind that embrasure than behind this one. If you can imagine, the embrasures were the most vulnerable sort of part of the fort. If you were to take a direct hit right there, you can imagine what happened with those bricks. The Totten embrasures were masonry reinforced with very thick bands of iron. It was a dramatic improvement over the old style brick embrasures. And Fort Montgomery basically incorporated both types throughout the fort. Other interesting features in the photo, you can see people inside the fort. There they are in the top windows. One of them is holding a baby. People like to go to that place. You can see a wooden covering still in place on one of the lower embrasures. And another fascinating thing is you can see the flagpole up there. There was indeed a flagpole on the top of the southeast bastion. This is another view of that southeast bastion showing the two different types. Keep in mind these are for identical guns. We're going to show the inside of these bastions later in the type of gun that was mounted there. But it does show how they incorporated the later technology as the fort was built. This is a rather interesting location in the fort also too. It's rather quite ironic because this location, and we'll show this later, but this is where not only where the stone was brought in, but this is where that crushed stone was brought out. The Western Company barges were brought up right against this very wall here as the fort was being demolished. So this particular location right here played a key role in the construction and the demolition of Fort Montgomery. Here we're seeing the embrasures from the inside. This is the the old style brick, and this is the modern top embrasures. The remarkable thing about these, they each have their pintle. Now the pintle basically was a very thick iron pin that the, I don't know if you've seen an illustration of it, but the howitzer would be swung on to basically change the view for the gun crew. There's another couple of pictures of the later top embrasures showing the iron reinforcing bands. You can see there's a couple, three of them, actually two of them. And this one's rather remarkable because you can see the inner band. A lot of the masonry has fallen away here. It's quite amazing as you see these embrasures on the floor. Some of them look like they're brand new. Others are in rather dreadful condition. This is a sketch of the altered covered face. This is from 1845. And the covered face, keep in mind, is that enormous earthen embankment that basically extends out quite a long ways from each side of the western faces of the fort. It was designed as a key part of the defensive strategy. And the main thing I wanted to bring out and show you about this was in the original, you can see the outline of the fort. This is the postern or sally port here. But what you can see here, and I really don't know if this was ever implemented or not, but the original plans were for a four-gun battery on the far western end of the cover face. You can see basically the traveler circles for that battery that was planned there. I know that the cover face does extend out there, and it looks like there may well have been something there, but it's very hard to tell. A lot of things happened in 1937 to change dramatically that face, that portion of the cover face. The wonderful photo from the Harwoods, but it shows that immense cover face that helped protect them in the attack. It comes out quite a ways to the south, it comes out quite a ways to the north. Keep in mind that they expected attackers to come down the river. But should they set up on what was called the commons, they felt that the cover face would actually take and serve a very effective purpose in helping to prevent the fort from being demolished in the siege. There were actually, no, it was an illustration of the cover face. I thought you should see this. Of course, at the time, the fort was in its active life, and I do say active life because I believe that the fort did have an active life. This would have been kept perfectly cleared and mowed. Obviously, they wouldn't have wanted to have any brush or trees on there for anything to hide behind. But it's a significant structure. If you can imagine auction teams, horse teams out there bringing in all this fill from within the moat, from within the commons, day after day, dragging in this enormous amount of fill and then putting all the riprap along the sides. They did a heck of a job because it hasn't eroded at all, I can see. Right and I basically went all around it Saturday, and I'm really amazed at the great job they did protecting the erosion. There were two entrances to the fort. Everybody knows about that entrance. But there was another very important entrance just to the north of the southeast bastion. And you can see the old wharf or dock that was there. This is where the barges would dock. I also happen to believe myself that this is where, obviously the dock was in better shape then, but this is where the cannons were brought in. Yes, there were cannons at Fort Montgomery. I don't believe that they brought them across that narrow bridge, certainly through that narrow postern. But this entryway to the lake played a key role in not only the construction but the armament of the fort. And contrary also, I'm going to take and burst a lot of bubbles here, it was not a drawbridge. I'll show you some pictures. This is when I first got this picture, Charlie Martin, Dave sent me this. It's an exterior view. The first picture I've seen of a real close-up of the bridge. That's not a drawbridge. It was a bridge that I believe was designed very narrow. It was designed purposely. It may have been a temporary structure, but I believe it was designed to be taken out very, very easily by those 24-pounder flank howitzers that were on each side of the flanks that basically faced up the moat. It was a narrow structure. It was not very large. You can see the person standing there. That's the outside entrance. Here we have an interior view of the Sally Porter postern. But this is what the landward or western entrances look like to the fort. You can see there was no apparatus for raising that bridge. Armament. Did Fort Montgomery ever have mounted cannon? The answer is yes. Despite what you've read, despite what you may have heard, and I just saw something on the web that came out just last week, and they stated unequivocally that Fort Montgomery never had mounted cannon. That's not true. There are documented Army papers. This is a document from February 1872. It's a plan of the casemate here. Unfortunately, it doesn't read very clearly. I'm sorry about that. These were huge plans. These are courtesy of, I first saw these on my visit to Thurber's office. These are from National Archives. In February 1872, we had 57 documented cannons. There were 7 32-pounders, there were 10 10-inch Rodmans, and there were 40 24-pounder flank howitzers. The flank howitzers basically were in the flanks of the bastions. They were designed to fire grape or canister shot. They were anti-personnel weapons. The 7 32-pounders, the 10-inch Rodmans, these were enormous Columbiads or seacoast guns that were designed basically to take and destroy ships. In January of 1886, we've got another 74 guns. I'm not going to read this because we don't have a lot of time, but basically we know we had an increase in guns, and there were, this 1886 report did document that there were 70 guns there. By 1900, they were down to 37. Most of the flank howitzers were still there, but this actually shows, this document shows that the guns were there. This is an actual armament plan. This is not just a plan of the fort. This is actually a plan of a War Department document showing the guns that were on site. 1901, there were 20 guns left. All the 24-pounders were there. 17 of them have been removed by this time, all from the second tier. And this is a truly remarkable document, 1902. It shows the barbette tier in the middle. It shows the casemate level in the center. And it shows the very bottom level, which only had the powder magazines, but only had flank howitzers in the flanks of these bastions. So by then we were down to 19 guns that were documented. All the 40 24-pounders have been removed. What did the guns look like? Well, there were basically 3 types. There were Columbiads. This is from my friend John Weaver. Like I said, that's a wonderful book. You want to see what these things look like. This is a barbette mount. This is what the guns would look like on the very top of Fort Montgomery. This is a 4-pintle mount. You can see that the gun will swivel on the traverse circle there. These pintles are still there to a large extent. These guns were mounted on many, obviously they were mounted on the north face. The enemy was going to come from Canada. But there were many of these. This is a 32-pounder. There were also 10-inch Rodmans mounted there. This is a casemated 10-inch Rodman. This is what the guns would look like inside the casemates. And this remarkable little gun down here, this was one of those 24-pounder flank howitzers. They were much smaller. They were designed to fire grape shot. Any fort, unfortunately, had actually managed to get across that cover face and was attempting to get across the moat, would have been faced with canister shot from these flank howitzers on both ends. The barbette tier, this is a document from 1850, basically some instructions for officers on how to mount. This shows the illustration of the barbette tier. You can see the pintle was mounted right there, and you have the wheel. This is an older gun. The later guns, this is a seacoast cannon, Columbia, but the big ones were the Rodmans that were mounted later on. I wanted to tell you how big those Rodman guns were. The Rodman cannon weighed on its carriage 15,000 pounds, 15 tons. The very top level of Fort Montgomery was designed to hold 53 of those. It's a remarkable thing to think about. That's at the very top level. The center level, the casemate level, was designed to hold, I think it's another 40 cannon. and of course the bottom level had just the flank howitzers. But as we get into the pictures of this fort, you'll notice enormous arches. And this fort was built because it had so significant and so strongly because it had to support this enormous weight from these cannons. This is a 10-inch Rodman mounted on the barbette tier. This one happens to have an iron carriage. These guns were present at Fort Montgomery. There were also a few 8-inch Rodmans that were there, a little bit smaller. This is a 10-inch Rodman smoothbore cannon. These were mounted not only on the barbette tier, but also in the casemates. They fired a 128-pound shot. That's enormous. I just recently hefted a 12-pound ball from the Battle of Plattsburgh, and I can imagine having that thing coming at me, but 128 pounds. If you want to imagine how heavy 128 pounds is, over 10 pounds stack of potatoes like this. It was an enormous thing. This particular gun is a 4-pintle mount. This was designed, this mount here is for the very top level. This is what they look like inside the casemate here. You have the pintle, which is the pin and rotated on. You have the small wheel up front, and you have the larger wheel in the back. And these, you see, of course, that the recoil would have to be accounted for. Every gun at Fort Montgomery was muzzle loaded. They actually had to put the ordnance in the front of the gun. None of them were breech loaded. This is an illustration showing how the cannons would swivel on the traverse circles. You can see, basically it's self-explanatory, but this shows how the cannon would slide on its carriage. The gun crew would have to push it forward, but it would come back and recoil. But those traverse circles figured prominently in Fort Montgomery. This is an illustration of one of the casemate tiers. You can see up front there where the number 3 is, one of the small traverse circles. Here you can see the larger ones. Each of these is a casemate. Each of these would have been designed to hold one of those guns. And of course, these were the large open doors that you saw with the wooden glass. These are little flank howitzers. All 40 were mounted. These were pretty formidable weapons. Basically, they were designed against the personnel that might be close to the fort. This is an actual illustration from the National Park Service showing what one of these cannons look like. As we get into the tour of the fort later, you're going to see lots of these casemates where these forts were, but there were a lot of these on the fort, and they were rather remarkable things. They packed a very powerful punch. This is a canister of shot. This is rather large shot, but this shows you what was put into them. There were different sizes. This was, like I said, large shot. This would have been basically put, if you can see it on the sabat, this would have been put into the muzzle of the cannon and fired at people. This is one of the actual flank howitzer casemates at the fort. Notice the graffiti. This is the southwestern bastion. What would happen is the pintle would be here. You can see the angle for the gun to traverse. There would have been a battery here. There would have been a traverse circle here. But this was looking straight down the moat. And this would have been, actually there was a 24-pounder mounted here. You'll notice on this side we have, and this is the moat, on the other side of that, you have the musket, the fact that the term was pierced for musketry. This is a fascinating picture. It's a little bit deceptive because this is actually a 15-inch Rodman gun. There were no 15-inch guns there. They were truly monsters. But it does show what it might have looked like up on that barbette tier of Fort Montgomery. Notice, of course, that's a bigger ball. That's not a 128-pound ball, but you can see what it must have been like up on that. This is a center pintle mount also, but this is not a terrible exaggeration to picture what it would have looked like on the top of the barbette tier of Fort Montgomery. Small arms. I had never thought about small arms in Fort Montgomery. And yet, Daniel Taylor tells us that there was a construction battalion there that was armed. They actually fired the guns at times. They scaled the guns. They practiced those guns, those heavy guns. I never thought about an armory of small guns, small arms. And yet, they were there. I'm convinced they were there. Particularly the muskets. Having a web presence, an internet presence is a truly wonderful thing. It can be a blessing and a curse. I mean, you hear from lots and lots of folks. Charlie Barney wrote a while ago and said that I've got something from the fourth. And at first I was skeptical. And then I did some research, and he did some research. And basically what we have here is a U.S. Army Model 1816 contract conversion musket and powder horn. I'm convinced that this came from the Army at Fort Montgomery. It was found by this fellow, Charlie Barney's father. He was a Rouses native veteran. He discovered the musket and the powder horn while practicing at the fort back in 1951, 52. It's been a family heirloom ever since. But it is, indeed, this is a picture of it. It's a contract conversion musket, converted to profession in the 1850s. I believe it came from the Fort Montgomery arsenal. We know there were cannon there, it only makes sense that they drilled. They would also have the small arms of hand. And it was a real treat, Charlie brought that musket here this evening. And so if you want to see it afterwards, it is up here along with that one. And I think it's really quite a thing, and I certainly appreciate him bringing that this evening. So, who knows, maybe some of you have muskets that you know, I don't know. But to me, this was quite a thing. But it was quite a revelation to know that there was actually an armory there. I don't have to tell you this. I don't have to tell you that Fort Montgomery holds a special place in this community's heart, if you will. It's long been a special place for Rouses Point residents. Personally, I think it has to do with the fact that it was way back to the Commons. Rouses Point residents used to take their cow out, and they used to basically browse on the Commons. They didn't have a town green, and people would bring Bessie out to the Commons every day. And we know that by end of 1842, when the Army decided to build Fort Montgomery, most of Fort Blunder had already been dismantled. Perhaps folks have Fort Blunder in your home too, I don't know. But the bottom line is Fort Blunder and Fort Montgomery have always held a special place for you folks. I thought these were remarkable pictures. This woman came in from the moat. She went in there. There's other pictures of her inside. She's in the 30s. This was before the fort was demolished. This picture is, I'll let it speak for itself. It shows that families went out there, and they did it for a long time ago. Charlie shared this one with me too. I don't know if anybody here actually remembers this gentleman doing his thing. To me, he was pretty gutsy, not because he climbed the flagpole, but because that flagpole had been there for a while. I don't know how long he stayed here. I don't know much about flagpole sitting. I can't imagine it was, I don't know why they would do it, but we know he did it. And he was on that Southeast Bastion. And if any of you folks know anything about these things, tell me, please. I'd love to know. This is a Mr. Fitch. Charlie tells me he's still alive. It was somewhere in the Albany area. And I thought that was a rather remarkable photo. Fort Montgomery, we know a lot of you have fond memories of it. We know that kids played there. There were mock wars. There were romantic encounters. There were Boy Scout camporees. All sorts of things happened at Fort Montgomery. A lot of them were quite benign, quite harmless. I hate to say it, but it's not necessarily the case so much anymore. The graffiti is just unbelievable. I wanted to show you some of the pictures of the graffiti. I had to be very selective, like you said. I know that the property has been posted for some time, but you can see people still do go out there. The property is posted of necessity. I know this may be very difficult for folks who always have free reign to go out there, but I can tell you that it's just common sense that the current owners have posted property. It's dangerous. If you completely disregard the damage to the property that's been done, it's downright dangerous out there. Common sense says that that property had to be posted. Here's why. that there were drug parties. We know there were alcohol parties out there at Lake. Can you imagine a drunken young person going through the fort in the dark, falling off into a magazine or what have you? It's a dangerous place, and times have changed. And the pods, the Fort Montgomery Estate folks have been very gracious in sharing what they can with me so I can share it with the world, because times have changed. It's no longer a place where everybody can go. So I'm going to quickly go through a few photos here to show you why you can't be there. Back in May of 2002, I received an email from Officer St. Louis saying that they were going to go out and break up a regularly scheduled party that was held out there. If you go to the property now without a signed release, you're going to mess with these folks. This particular detail was made up of individuals from the Coast Guard, the State Police, the Grand Isle County Sheriff's Department, the County Sheriff's Department, the Rouses Point Police Department, and you're also likely to encounter Homeland Security folks out there now. Times have changed. Certainly the border, the proximity to the border has made that also important. The destruction of Fort Montgomery, as far as I'm concerned, is a real blunder. There was a blunder associated with this current fort. But in 1937, the fort was systematically taken down to build the bridge. It was a difficult time. It was a different time. It was amidst the Great Depression. People needed work. They saw a fort that nobody had fought at. There was no battles that were fought there. There were all these stories about blunders, and there were all these stories about nobody ever having a garrison out there. The legend basically was that this fort was a joke. It was an embarrassment. Nobody thought about the fact that it was a remarkable engineering feat, and that it was an incredible, truly remarkable example of third system fortification. And it was a truly remarkable example of the state-of-the-art military technology of the time. They decided to take the fort and build the bridge with stone. It started at the eastern bastion. This is the very beginnings of it. You can see, of course, all the wood that we moved looking across the. This is from the D&H Delaware Hudson booklet. It's basically showing people in that very same location, placing the dynamite. The first step was to place the dynamite. You can see the floor joists where the floors were the bend. You can see the second floor up there for the casement here. Dynamite was placed. It was the earth of the terraplane level was scraped off. The earth was a key part of the fort security, protected against bombardment. The marvelous finely sanded stone came out first. You can see the poster in there. It was quite a thing. This fort was designed to resist bombardment, and these folks took it down in a very short period of time. This is the crusher here, but it was most of it was removed. These folks were probably very happy to be working. After the stone was brought down, they had to be made into smaller enough pieces to go into the crusher. It's amazing to me, but if you look at these sledgehammers, you can also, you can see the girth of these fellows' arms, but they were happy to be working. And, it's a remarkable picture that's taken close to the entryway. This is probably the only photo that's been previously published. This is the southeast bastion. There would have been a stairway there. Notice the flagpole was still hanging in there. But you can see the crusher, and that is the location where the bars were offloaded. Another picture looking north, and here you have the Western Company barges. Basically, you can see how that stone was crushed into really small pieces and headed out to use this stone in the bridge. Another view towards the northwest bastion, and I like to get through that fast because I consider it a truly sad place to come. I'm going too slowly, so I'm going to have to go a little faster through the tour, and I apologize for that, folks, but I think you probably want to see the tour. I'll get through as fast as I can. This is a remarkable glass slide from the courtesy of Power Text folks. This next slide was actually taken by one of the caretakers report, Sergeant Bork. It's truly remarkable in that it shows the cover face, it shows the western curtain. I have a plan basically showing where we are. It's taken from northwest fashion, looking over towards the southwest, but you can see that moat very clearly. This is a wet ditching moat. This is another illustration basically showing, of course, the moat, the southwest fashion. You can see what the moat looks like today. You can see the counter scarp here, which was the wall basically was designed to keep that counter face nice and stuck up against the wall. This wonderful picture from the Harwoods basically shows that enormous cover face. It shows the wet ditch. You can see the growth. This was taken in May. It gets much more lush in the summer, but I thought it gave a great perspective of what the fort looked like, especially compared with the plan. This is a rather dreadful photo, but it's I felt the need to show it. This is from the last next slide for the Power Text. But it shows the bridge before they put the handrails up. Once again, you can see that is not a drawbridge. It's showing the cover face. If you take it from the cover face, looking up the moat, you can see how clearly defined the moat is. You can see the service magazines there. And you can see also the very tips of the structures that were atop the stairways. This is the moat today. You can see the vitrification, what have you, is filled in. But basically, if you compare the moat to what used to be looked like and what it looks like today, you can see certainly it was filled in a lot. Here we have a picture looking straight on. Once again, it's courtesy of Mr. Barney, looking into the fort from that entrance across the bridge. This is a remarkable thing to see. This is your entrance today. You can see that the destruction of that western curtain was almost complete. For emphasis, once again, that's what it used to look like. This is pretty much the same location today. When I was there with Roger on Saturday, we got a little bit closer. I'm holding Mr. Barney's photo there, and you can see the view into the Sally Port. As I was in there, of course, the graffiti is just dreadful there. You see how high they could reach. I have to recall all the way up to come to Sherman, going into this Sally Port, basically, shortly after the Civil War. Being so taken with his fort, he had decided they were going to move the garrison from Plattsburgh to this fort. He was just very, very impressed with Montgomery. And he was true to his word. He went back to Washington, said we're going to move it. The citizens of Plattsburgh put up such a hue and cry that it did not happen. However, to me, I like to minimize that because I really believe that if the situation hadn't gotten bad enough, that garrison from Plattsburgh would have been moved up here in a heartbeat. A lot of fort system fortifications were not active in garrison. They are designed to have the local militia work in there if an alarm became significant. So I minimize the fact that there was not an active garrison either. Parade ground looking across toward the southwest corner. That's what it looked like earlier. You've seen that picture. This is an illustration a little bit later on. You can see that the doors have been removed from the casemate. You can see the ponding stool, limestone here. I'm trying to show you a contrast between what it used to look like, what it looked like a little bit later on, and what it looks like today. That's not to say, as you look at these photos, I want to make sure that you understand, I'm not saying that this fort is a total worthless, useless ruin. I still think there's some hope for it, but I did want to show the contrast, okay, between what the fort looked like before, because I want to stress that this was a remarkable structure. 1937, you can see the demolition going on. This is another view looking over towards the north curtain, directly towards the northwest bastion. Obviously, that entire north curtain was removed in its entirety. This is a view looking straight down the west wall, the curtain barrack section. You can still see some of the lath from the plaster. You can see some of the, this is actually a heating, there was, I believe there was a stove in there. You can see some of the fireplaces. Remember, keep in mind there were two levels. There's actually a floor removed in 37. So there would have been two levels of rooms here. If I don't do this, I'm going to lose better stuff to show. But the west wall is almost indistinguishable from what it used to be. Now, this is a couple other features within the west wall. There was a flue there. It's not a fireplace per se. I'm guessing, and I need to spend some more time talking to John Weaver or visiting other system qualifications, but I'm thinking there may have actually been a wood stove in there. I don't know that for sure. If anybody in the audience does know, you can tell me, because there's a lot of these features within the walls of the fort. But here is a, you can see where the floor would have actually been seated, set on top of these supports. This is looking out onto the moat. This is a room basically adjoining the southwest bastion. When I was there Saturday with the Channel 3 crew, there was a raven, had a nest of babies in there, put up one heck of a ruckus. Basically, there's a lot of big bird nests in there, I think osprey nests. But to show that the people are still trespassing on the property, when this picture was taken in 2000, that particular piece of wood was leaning there. When I went back last Saturday, maybe I went to the other side of the room, so people are still in there doing their thing. This is another remarkable picture of the early stages of the demolition. This is courtesy of Mr. Varney. It shows when they're taking the inner area all away from the postern. You can see now what it looks like. This is actually that very same area behind this tree was the actual entrance to the fort. So that construction was pretty much complete there of that west wall. The south wall, the curtain casement section, is the best preserved part of the fort. You can see the graffiti, but this is the part that you see in that western bastion, which is certainly the best preserved part of the fort. This is a curtain section, but it does show you the arches. Those enormous arches were built to be substantial because they had to support some very, very heavy cannons. The ovens are still there. They're in the southwestern bastion. I doubt they ever held a fire, but they're remarkable things to see. The ovens are back in that southwestern bastion. I took 3 pictures of those just this last Saturday. This is a view looking down on the eastern bastion from the top of the southeast bastion. You can see they took out basically everything but the grave, a few layers of the stone wall. This is a view. I'm trying to show you where we are. Looking towards the southwest bastion, you can see the different types of embrasures. You can see the musket loopholes here, and you can see that the second tier is where the casemates were for heavy cannons. Oh, it's interesting to note that the fort was actually higher. This fort was 49 feet high. It was actually another 4 or 5 tiers of stone that had been removed by the contractors in 1937. This is a view towards the southeast bastion. You see in the picture to the left, you see the flagpole there. You can see what it looks like today. I just want to see a before and after photo. These are a couple of photos from within that southeast bastion, looking northeast and southwest on each side of it. One of them still has the pinto. This is the second level, and this is one of the bastions on the lower level. You can see the brick. Imagine being behind that as opposed to the masonry. This is rather a dramatic photo. This is the northwest bastion. And the contractors left us alone. This fell in 1970-71. This is the moat. That wall collapsed into the moat. The contractors did not do this. I thought it was particularly ironic that the very best preserved cotton casemate is right there in that section. It's like it's brand spanking new. There's top and brazier there on that. I have some very real concerns. This is the mirror image of the southwestern bastion, which is opposite end of it. This is the southwestern bastion. This side was, this is the western wall. This basically was the mirror image of what you would see on the other side. On the opposite end of that, you would have had, the other flank, you would have had the cannon braziers. This is another picture of the loopholes on the exterior of that southwestern bastion. This is standing inside what would have been the moat. This is the interior of that southwestern bastion. We just saw the exterior, now we're looking at the interior, and you can see there would have been a flank house on each farm. Notice the water. The water is a very real concern. You think about the water, what it does. It drips down, it freezes. The water has become a very real problem in what's the best preserved part of the fort. I have some real concerns about the water. I have some very real concerns about the southwestern bastion. And here's why. Third system forts were designed to have what's called the scarp wall, or the outside wall, separate from the casemate structure with the arches. This was designed so that if the outside scarp wall could take a beating from guns, and the casemate would still stand intact. Basically, the guns would stay there. You know, the gun could keep firing even if that wall was demolished. Notice the separation at the bottom. Notice the separation at the very top. Notice those. The 1886 report that I referred to, I'm going to read to you something here. It says the scarp wall has settled in places and is separated from the casemate arches. To prevent further separation, iron rods have been introduced. Those iron rods kept that casement, kept that scarp wall, being connected over here, from settling any further. The fourth point, there are other forts that basically had the same problem. Iron rods were crucial. I believe those iron rods were cut in 1937. How ironic it is that the part that the fort that they left over, they basically almost guaranteed its destruction. Because now that those iron rods are gone, and I hate to say this, I'd like to get out there with another engineer. I'm looking forward to taking John Weaver out there with me, who is an engineer. I'm afraid that western wall could go. So to me, time is of the essence. You can see it separating. That's exactly what happened with this mirror image of this western bastion on the western scarp bastion where it fell in. Here you can see it. This is the northwest bastion that collapsed in the 70s. Here we have the southwestern bastion largely intact, and I say for now. Because the scarp wall has started settling back in 1886. And to me it's rather remarkable. It's just holding itself up. The northeast bastion, North Curtain, was demolished completely in 1937. This northwest bastion, part we see here, as we saw earlier, that is the part that collapsed into the moat. This is gone. All of this is gone. That's all that's left. And this was the heavily armed part of the fort. Each of those places did indeed have in their 10-inch rodman a 32-pounder or a flank howitzer in the flank of the bastion. This is the northeast curtain. It was completely destroyed in 1937. It's fascinating because you can see that this was the very first part of the fort that was built. Notice the top and bottom section have the old style brick and braziers. So we know where they actually started building. This is what it looks like today. You can see that the east wall. You can see the northeast bastion. There's a close-up of it. There's a close-up of the very same braziers before and after. It's a real shame. But that's what it looked like. So a fort was built. A fort was destroyed. A bridge was built. Here we have the piles being driven into the lake for the foundation for the bridge. You can see the close-up. You can see the east bastion has been completely separated. Obviously, they took down the two curtains first, but the Great Bridge was built in 1937. In this later photo, you can see the derrick is still there, the crane is still there, but the flashing is completely removed. And here we have the grand opening of the bridge. Granted, it was a remarkable thing to see, and it was a well-needed bridge, but they didn't need to take a stone from the fort. Fort Montgomery still stands. The bridge that was built with stone has itself been rebuilt. And even today, the new bridge, there are still vestiges of the old, the embankments, the fishing access, I believe, on the Vermont side. Some of the, when the bridge starts on each side, there'll be some of that. To me, Fort Montgomery was not a blunder. It was a bulwark on the border. It actually served a key role in defending the frontier. It would have been foolish not to put a fort there. It was foolish to take it down. There's still a part of the fort that is left. I think, I'm not an engineer, but I think it's going fast. And I think if anybody wants to try to work with the current owners to do something about this fort, it needs to be done soon. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anyone got some questions for Jim?
Sir, I don't understand why they built it. What was the danger of 1844? Who was going to attack?
One thing I would like to mention is that there was a very, very rocky relationship with England. There had been, of course, Canada being part of the Commonwealth. There were serious border conflicts. That 45th parallel was always being disputed. Particularly, there was a huge amount of territory in Maine that was disputed right up into the Civil War. There was very real danger of Britain coming into the war on the side of the South. So there was debate about the technology, the usefulness of it, because the guns had become more and more powerful. But the location, the fact that a fort was needed, something was needed there, that was never in dispute. That's a good question, though.
Someone else?
I don't think the fort itself is sinking. There is a very real danger, in my humble opinion, of the scarp wall, which is just holding itself up. That's the outer wall collapsing. That's what happened in the 70s. Keep in mind the scarp wall was intentionally designed to be separate from the casemate tier. Okay, those arches were designed to hold up the cannon. I believe that the scarp wall itself is stagnating dramatically, and I think somehow it needs to be reinforced. I was rather horrified to see the settlement that's happening on that scarp wall. Sir?
Why didn't they finish the demolition and take out everything?
I don't know. That's an excellent question. I think probably they wanted to leave a little something for people to see. Quite frankly, the fort did not, it was a disappointment to them. It did not prove to be everything they wanted it to be. They originally thought it was going to be more useful to them. There were far too many bricks in it. They didn't want bricks. They had to change their plans halfway through the demolition. The fort did not prove to be the wonderful asset that people expected it to be. So it was really destroyed for larger than nothing. Yeah?
What was the name of the first fort that you call Fort Blunder?
I don't believe it had a name. It was really only an official Army fort from 1816 to 1818, part of 1819. I can't find anything that basically says that that fort was named. I do not believe it was named Fort Montgomery. John Weaver basically has a document that shows towards the, as these third system fortifications got to be built, the names that were assigned by the War Department to the forts. Fort Montgomery, I don't believe, was inherited from that early fort. I don't think it had a name. I don't think it was really an official fort long enough. It never had guns. It was completed, essentially, but it was never armed. And it's a great question, because people refer to that fort as Fort Montgomery, and I don't think it was. Can I promise you it wasn't? No, I don't think it was. Yeah?
You said the stone came from Île la Motte. Where did the stones from the first fort came from?
Same place. Same place. Sir, Albert?
You mentioned that William Sherman was there, and certainly Cotton was in there during the building. Do you have, is there any records of other military VIPs that visited the fort?
Those are the two big names. I don't know of anybody else. You might recognize some of them. I can show you some of the documents I have. This is Howard Coffin. Mr. Coffin is a widely regarded writer on the American Civil War. Honored to have his leaving, but certainly Howard, if we can look through some of the documents. But I know Sherman was there, Totten was there, but those are the two names that stick in my mind. Sir?
I had heard that the stone house on Lake Street was built from the stones from this fort. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. Many Rouses Point structures. Supposedly the Methodist Church was built from the first fort stones. According to Taylor, most of the first fort was dismantled by local citizens. They didn't have to tear it down in 1844, it was gone. It's hard to believe, but that's the legend anyway. We know that several Rouses Point buildings were built from not only the first fort, but I believe some of the finishings in the second fort may very well grace local buildings. Some of you may live in homes that have some of these pieces, I don't know. Sir?
Had construction on the fort actually stopped before President Lincoln ordered that it be resumed, or did he just simply order it to be pick up the pace?
It came in spurts and jumps. It certainly picked up during the Civil War. It was a very frantic time of activity. They really went great guns on it. There were periods of months when nothing happened. It was a lot like any major military appropriation, any major weapon system. I mean, quite often the funds are cut, they're going to be restored. The third system fortification system is rather controversial, but a lot of money went into it. Sure.
I've always been told about Ammunition Hill, which is just west above the high water mark. And my father was born in '96, so he can remember going to Ammunition Hill and digging for stuff that was buried there. But some of the armaments were buried in Ammunition Hill.
I don't know where Ammunition Hill is, but I can tell you that there were supposedly were two redoubts. That the first fort had a redoubt on the commons. Now these forts, redoubts would not have been built more than a mile away. That was basically the limit of where they would have put these redoubts. So Ammunition Hill, maybe that was the site of the original redoubt. I don't know that. But there were outworks, at least planned. We can see from the original British document showing the first fort. We know there was what they called the guardhouse there. I'd love to know where Ammunition Hill was. There's a lot of ruins. There's some strange ruins on the commons. There was an astronomical station there. There's some odd border stuff there. The commons itself has a remarkable history all by itself. There's a story in itself, the commons. But there are some strange ruins up there. I know that some of the pillars are from the astronomical station from 1845. I'd love to know about Ammunition Hill. Maybe you could someday show me where it was.
This was what my father used to tell me where it was. It's just west of the fort, but on the Canadian side of the border, just on the, it's a little hill in the woods.
You might have a hard time getting there now, don't you? Oh, yeah? Thank you very much.
Jim, thanks very much. And again, everyone, thank you so much for coming tonight. We have refreshments over here for those of you who'd like to stay and talk a little bit about the fort. I think perhaps Jim will stay. I'm going to be to answer a few more questions personally, and I also invite you to join us at the Historical Society. We have brochures for membership. We have a number of programs that I think that many of you will be interested in. It's a growing organization. As you know, we're very involved in the former D&H station, and perhaps this is something that it is critical that we become involved into as a community and as citizens of New York State, Vermont, and Canada. Perhaps this is something we could all come together to do, to preserve our heritage and to save what we could wonderful asset. So please keep in touch with us. And there is a new website in town, I understand, which is routespoint.org. Please visit that website, and we would like very much, the person who is doing that would like very much to hear the information that you have from your civic